Despite its last release being over a year ago, the Resident Evil series is the talk of the gaming world right now, with rumors about its next entry flying all over the internet. The rumor generating the most discussion, and by far the most interesting one to me, is that apparently Resident Evil 9 is going to be an open world game. I've been thinking a lot about the concept of an open world Resident Evil game since reading these rumors, so I figured I would make a video breaking down my thoughts on the matter. Because, to be honest, I'm a little torn. It's a complicated matter in my opinion, but it boils down to a simple question. Is an open world Resident Evil game a good idea? Let's talk about it. Let's start with the obvious. Unless the game is an unmitigated disaster, making an open world RE game is probably a good idea for Capcom. Love it or hate it, the gaming industry has been trending towards a more open world oriented approach for years now, and established franchises switching to open world formats have led to some huge success stories in recent years. The Legend of Zelda is a beloved and iconic franchise to most gamers, but it wasn't until the franchise made the switch to the open world format with Breath of the Wild in 2017 that the series really soared to massive mainstream popularity. Similarly, From Software's Souls games were always seen as cult classics, beloved by much of the gaming community, but not household names by any stretch of the imagination, until they went open world and Elden Ring came along. Elden Ring was From Software's first true open world game, and the title absolutely exploded in popularity, reaching mainstream and commercial heights that the studio's previous games never came close to. So in other words, if Capcom wants to absolutely maximize its profits, then making the jump to open world for Resident Evil is a no-brainer. But can they pull it off? What would that game even look like? I believe in Capcom. Their recent resume speaks for itself, but I do think they have to be careful here. The RE series excels in close, tight quarter situations and the tension and scares that those situations create. Whether it's the police station in RE2 or the castle in RE4, when you think of Resident Evil, you probably think of tight quarters or claustrophobic hallways before you think of wide open spaces and open world environments. So for these reasons, I think it's natural to have reservations about the series going in this direction. However, I also think that there's plenty of reason for optimism. As I said before, Capcom clearly knows what they're doing. They haven't released a dud in the RE series in a very long time, and their remake of Resident Evil 4 is one of the best games of last year. But even more importantly than this track record, it seems that recent Resident Evil games have already begun dipping their toes in the open world waters. RE Village felt like a mini open world in many ways with the namesake village area. The player was constantly coming back to that central village and unlocking new parts as they progressed the story, which led to a bit more emphasis on exploration than the series typically provided. Even more interesting though, last year's RE4 remake toyed with the concept a little as well, by making the game's lake area much more open than in the original title. After killing the lake monster, the player is free to explore the lake's different islands at their leisure, including some areas that are completely optional. I think this in itself is some of the most compelling evidence that Capcom intends to take the series in this direction, as it went out of its way to add this content to the remake and provide the player with more freedom than the original title had. It's like Capcom is slowly wading into the open world waters, ensuring its team gets some experience with this sort of thing before letting them loose on a full-fledged open world game. But what's most encouraging here is that even though these are bite-sized representations of the open world concept, the RE series doesn't miss a beat in these moments. I love the village area in RE8, and I think that it's on par with some of the most iconic locales in the franchise. Village has its faults, particularly all of Heisenberg's factory, but I don't think that any of them really have to do with its open world experimentation, and I think the game lays an exciting blueprint for a fully fledged open world title in the future. Same thing goes for the lake in RE4. That section does a tremendous job of providing the player with freedom to explore, while also not taking away the more claustrophobic areas the series is known for. You have the freedom of the open water, but are also driving your boat to cave areas that provide tighter, more traditional RE environments. And ultimately, I think that's what the template needs to be here. RE9 could feature an open world setting on a scale the series has never seen before, such as maybe a large city overrun by zombies, but it should also act as a hub that spins off into more traditional settings for the series. Maybe there's a large mansion on the outskirts of town that the player explores, or a sewer system underneath the city that has to be visited for story purposes. These areas could provide the tight, claustrophobic tension and exciting set-piece moments that the series is known for, while also allowing the player the joys of an open-world setting in the main hub area. A true best-of-both-worlds situation, if you will. And let's be honest, Capcom could do some pretty cool things with an open-world concept here. The series has basically already perfected the mechanic of having a creepy enemy pursue the player across the level with Mr. X and Nemesis, but imagine this concept in a larger open-world environment. Imagine some sort of horrifying, lightning-quick monstrosity that at certain points in the game relentlessly pursues the player across the map, popping up when you least expect it. Concepts like this would be a great way to shake up the franchise's scare tactics, which is vital after 8 mainline games and multiple spin-offs. And while we're on the subject of open world mechanics, Resident Evil already has a pretty good grasp on one of the big ones, collectibles. One of the more underrated aspects of RE4 for me has always been the joy of finding the various treasures strewn across its world. Needing to complete a treasure set, such as finding all the necessary jewels for a crown in order to maximize its sell value, is such a simple concept, but a genius one nonetheless. It makes finding collectibles feel much more rewarding and in-depth than it does in many other games, and this sort of thing is begging to be fleshed out even more in an open world title. I'm not saying that RE9 should be a collectathon, I don't think anybody wants that, but taking the RE4 treasure mechanic and expanding that across a large, open map area is pretty exciting. Plus, as other completionists know, one of the most frustrating parts of an RE4 playthrough is missing a treasure and not realizing until you've been locked out of the area where you missed it. An open world presumably solves this frustration since backtracking would be built into the game's structure. And one other idea here, since I'm basically creating my dream Resident Evil 9 template, a larger scale open world game allows Capcom to really tap into the franchise's deep and rich history. I'll admit that I'm only a casual consumer of RE lore, but like many other people who grew up with Resident Evil 4, I love Leon Kennedy. That dude is one of the freaking coolest characters in all of gaming, I don't care what anyone says. And I know that there are many other people out there who are similarly attached to other series staples, such as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. A large open world game would allow Capcom to bring multiple playable characters into the fold, and maybe tell an interwoven story with multiple characters at its center. I can understand Capcom being a bit gun-shy here, since the last time they tried to do this whole multiple playable characters thing, it resulted in the very, let's say, divisive title that was RE6, but you gotta think that they're in a better position to pull it off now. And bringing in multiple beloved characters, each with their own set of outfits and different skills and unlocks, could add a lot of content to the game, not to mention huge levels of fan service. So let's wrap this up. Where do I stand on the whole Resident Evil open world idea? Well, like I said before, while I understand the reservations and uneasiness about such a beloved and iconic franchise making the jump to open world, I think that more than anything, this is a reason to be excited. If you really look at them, the last couple of Resident Evil titles illustrate that maybe the jump to open world isn't as big of a leap as we think, so the chances of this being some huge flameout seems pretty low. Additionally, the shift could provide the team with some exciting new opportunities and allow the Resident Evil franchise to take some bold new steps forward. Bring on the open world.